The morning of March 12, 2025, broke cold and bleak over Cedar Ridge Cemetery in Maplewood, Tennessee, a small town of 18,000 nestled in the rolling hills just south of Nashville, where the scent of pine and damp soil hung heavy in the air. The graveyard perched on a rise overlooking the town, its weathered tombstones etched with names of generations past, framed by skeletal oaks clawing at a sky thick with fog. A crowd of mourners, clad in somber blacks and grays, gathered in a tight knot around the small white casket of 8-year-old Ava Reynolds. Their breaths visible in the chill, their faces drawn with a grief that had silenced Maplewood's usual bustle. Reverend Daniel Harper's voice quavered as he intoned a prayer, his words a fragile thread meant to stitch together a community torn apart by the sudden loss of a girl known for her wide green eyes and a laugh that could chase away the darkest clouds, a girl who, 3 days ago, had supposedly drowned in Cedar Creek, her body pulled lifeless from the water by paramedics after a desperate 911 call. Tom Reynolds, Ava's father, stood at the head of the casket. His broad frame hunched under a worn denim jacket, his hands, calloused from years as a mechanic at Harper's auto shop, shaking as they gripped the edge of the wood. At 40, his dark hair was flecked with gray, his rugged face hollowed by sleepless nights and a sorrow that carved deep lines around his mouth. Beside him, Laura Reynolds, 37, clutched a crumpled tissue, her auburn hair falling in tangled strands across her pale cheeks, her hazel eyes red and distant. She'd spent her days behind the counter at Maplewood Grocery, her smile a fixture for customers, but now that warmth was gone, extinguished by the weight of burying their only child. Ava had been their miracle, born after years of heartache. A bright spark who turned their modest ranch house on Oak Street into a home with her endless chatter, her butterfly drawings pinned to every wall, and her boundless love for Rex, the German shepherd who'd been her shadow since she was 5. The funeral had drawn half the town, neighbors, teachers, church folk, each one whispering condolences that felt hollow against the reality of Ava's absence. Maplewood was a place where life moved slow, its main street lined with a diner, a hardware store, and a feed co-op where gossip flowed like the creek that cut through the hills. The lumber yards and small farms kept it ticking, a community of hard workers who prided themselves on knowing every face, every story. The Reynolds house sat just off the town square, a single-story clapboard with a sagging porch and a yard where Ava chased fireflies, her laughter echoing through summer nights. Tom spent long hours under car hoods, his evenings reserved for Ava's bedtime stories, while Laura juggled shifts and motherhood, her hands rough from ringing up groceries but gentle when braiding Ava's hair. Rex had arrived on Ava's 5th birthday. Tom found him as a pup, abandoned in a ditch off Route 52, shivering and half-starved. He brought the German shepherd home in his truck, wrapped in an old blanket, and the moment Ava saw him, she squealed, naming him Rex after a cartoon dog she adored. From that day, Rex grew into a 90-pound protector, sleek, black and tan, with amber eyes that seemed to see into your soul, sleeping by Ava's bed, trailing her to the bus stop, waiting outside Maplewood Elementary during recess like a sentinel. The school had resisted at first, dogs on grounds were a liability, but Rex's calm demeanor won them over. His presence a comfort in a town where kids roamed free until dusk called them home. No one could have foreseen how that bond would unravel everything they thought they knew. Spring had just begun to warm the Tennessee hills when tragedy struck. Ava, now 8, met Rex daily at the school's chain-link fence, her routine as steady as the sunrise, her backpack bouncing, her voice calling his name as he sat patiently, tail thumping. But 5th grader Hannah Pierce, a sharp-tongued girl with a posse of followers, had targeted Ava for weeks, mocking her thrift store clothes, her stupid mutt. Ava endured it with quiet grace, clutching Laura's advice, rise above, honey, kindness is stronger. That Tuesday, during recess, Hannah and her clique cornered Ava near Cedar Creek, a shallow stream behind the playground. Off limits but hidden by a thicket of willows. Hannah snatched Ava's sketchbook, pages filled with Rex in crayon heroics, and tore them, tossing them into the water. Freak and her dog, she sneered as Ava lunged to save her drawings. Her foot slipping on the muddy bank, the current, swollen from recent rains, dragging her under in an instant. Rex, watching from the fence, cleared it in a single leap, his bark echoing as he plunged into the creek. Teachers shouting in his wake. He surfaced with Ava's collar in his teeth, dragging her to shore, but she was limp, her lips blue, her small body cold. Hannah froze, her friends scattering as rumors twisted like wildfire. Some swore Rex pushed her. Others that he attacked her in a frenzy. Paramedics arrived, their faces grim as they checked Ava's pulse. Nothing. They pronounced her dead on the scene, her body still, her breath gone. Rex, blood trickling from a gash above his eye where Ava's flailing arm had struck him, howled as they loaded her into the ambulance, his cries piercing the air as a teacher wrestled him back. His leash taut with his struggle to follow. The aftermath was a nightmare that swallowed Maplewood whole. Hannah's parents, the Pierces, owners of Pierce Lumber, the town's economic backbone, spun a tale of a vicious dog. Their lawyer leaning on Principal Sarah Mitchell with threats of lawsuits. Mitchell, a stern woman in her 50s, caved under pressure, banning Rex from school grounds despite Dr. Emily Carter's report, the town vet, no relation to the Reynolds, stating, gash consistent with rescue, not aggression. The school board, spooked by liability, issued an ultimatum to the Reynolds, remove Rex or lose their renter's insurance. A policy tied to their landlord's strict rules. Tom, his voice breaking, drove Rex 70 miles to his brother Jake's farm in Rutherford County, Ava sobbing as the German Shepherd's amber eyes watched her from the truck bed. His tail wagging faintly as if to say, "I'll be back." Laura held Ava as the truck disappeared, her small frame shaking with grief, her whispers of, "He saved me," lost in the wind. Maplewood split like a cracked log. The Pierces' influence fueled a smear campaign, "Dangerous dog claims child," screamed the Maplewood Herald, and their "Safe Schools Now" group rallied. Drowning out voices like Jake's neighbor, Old Man Hayes, who swore Rex was gentler than a kitten. Church pews emptied beside the Reynolds, neighbors crossed the street to avoid them. And the diner grew quiet when Laura entered. Ava faded fast, her appetite gone, her eyes dull, her laughter silenced. 3 weeks later, she collapsed at school, her small body crumpling during lunch. Her health ravaged by a grief no child should bear. Doctors at Maplewood General found her immune system failing, stress carving a path for infections, fevers, exhaustion, a final fall at recess where she slipped into a coma-like state. Machines missed her faint pulse, her vitals so low they declared her dead, the coroner's report rushed, the funeral set. The Reynolds, numb with loss, buried their questions, unaware Rex had broken through Jake's fence 2 nights ago. Racing through rain-soaked fields and highways, his paws bleeding as he ran 70 miles back to Maplewood, driven by a bond that defied distance and death. Now, at Cedar Ridge Cemetery. Rex's howl shattered the fog as the mourners stood frozen, his muddy paws slamming Ava's casket, his cries a primal demand that cut through the reverent hush. Tom hesitated, Laura's plea, "He knows something," echoing in his ears as Rex reared. His claws gouging the wood, his barks rising into a wail that rattled the church windows. Reverend Harper faltered, "We must," but Dr. Carter pushed through, 42, her vet's coat swapped for a black sweater, her sharp gray eyes narrowing. "He's not grieving, he's signaling," she said, voice steady. "I've seen dogs detect heartbeats, something's wrong." The crowd held its breath as Rex's desperation mounted, a miracle trembling on the edge of the unthinkable. The fog clung to Cedar Ridge Cemetery like a shroud, wrapping Maplewood, Tennessee, in a damp silence broken only by the relentless howls of Rex, the German Shepherd whose muddy paws battered Ava Reynolds' small white casket. The morning light barely pierced the mist, casting eerie shadows across the mourners' faces as they stood in a tense semicircle, their black coats and umbrellas trembling in the chill wind. Tom Reynolds gripped the casket's edge, his mechanic's hands shaking, his dark eyes hollow as he watched Rex's frantic assault, each claw mark a wound on his heart, each bark a plea he couldn't silence. Laura Reynolds knelt beside the dog, her auburn hair plastered to her tear-streaked face, her voice a broken thread. "What is it, boy? What do you see?" Rex's cries sharpened. His 90-pound frame trembling with exhaustion, his amber eyes locked on the wood as if it held a secret he'd crossed 70 miles to reveal. Maplewood had unraveled since Ava's death. The Reynolds ranch house on Oak Street, once alive with her chatter, stood silent, her butterfly drawings curling at the edges, her rock collection gathering dust on the porch. Tom's shifts at Harper's auto shop grew erratic, his hands fumbling with wrenches as grief blurred his focus, while Laura's hours at Maplewood grocery dwindled, customers avoiding her haunted gaze. Ava's collapse 3 days ago, after weeks of fading, had been the final blow. Maplewood General pronounced her drowned, her body cold from Cedar Creek, her pulse undetectable. The coroner's report was swift, the funeral rushed, but Rex's absence gnawed at them, 70 miles away at Jake's farm, or so they'd believed. The town's fracture deepened after the creek incident. Hannah Pierce's parents, wielding their lumber wealth, painted Rex as a menace, their lawyer pressuring Principal Sarah Mitchell with legal threats. Mitchell banned Rex, ignoring Dr. Emily Carter's evidence, injury from rescue, not attack. The school board, fearing lawsuits, forced the Reynolds to choose, lose Rex or their home insurance. Tom drove him to Jake's. Ava's sobs echoing as Rex's eyes followed her, his tail wagging faintly in a promise of return. The Maplewood Herald fanned the flames, dog turns on girl. And the Pierces' safe schools now group rallied. Drowning out old man Hayes' defense, that dog's a saint. Church pews emptied beside the Reynolds, the diner grew hushed when Laura entered, and Ava's light dimmed, her appetite gone. Her eyes vacant, her health crumbling under grief's weight. 3 weeks after Rex's departure, Ava collapsed at school, her small body crumpling during recess, her immune system buckling. Infections raged, fevers spiked, and after a final fall, she slipped into a state so still that machines missed her faint signs, declaring her dead. The Reynolds, broken, planned her funeral. Unaware Rex had escaped Jake's farm 2 nights prior, tearing through a fence and racing 70 miles, across rain-soaked fields, highways, and creeks, his paws bleeding, his ribs stark against his coat. Driven by an instinct that defied logic. Now, at the cemetery, Rex's howls turned desperate, his nose pressing the casket seams, his paws slamming with a rhythm that shook the mourner's resolve. Dr. Carter shoved through, her gray eyes sharp, her vet's instincts flaring. "He's not mourning, he's alerting," she said, kneeling by Rex. "Dogs sense things, heartbeats, seizures, this is specific." Tom's jaw clenched, Laura's hand gripping Rex's fur as he reared, claws gouging deeper, his growl rising into a bark that rattled the church's stained glass. "Get him off," shouted Jim Pierce. Hannah's father, his lumber baron swagger faltering as Rex ignored him. Hannah shrank back, guilt flickering in her eyes, her bravado crumbling under the dog's cry. Sheriff Mike Lawson stepped forward, 35. Wiry, his badge glinting, having tracked Rex's journey after truckers reported a dog on Route 52, leaving water at rest stops. "He ran 70 miles, Lawson said, voice low. "If he's here, we listen." Dr. Carter nodded, pressing an ear to the casket, then shot up. "Tom, Laura, open it. Now." Jim Pierce protested, "This is insane." But Reverend Harper hesitated. Then handed Tom the key, his faith bending. "If there's a chance." Tom's hands shook as he worked the latches, Rex pacing, whining, his bloody paws staining the grass. Laura clutched Dr. Carter, whispering, "Please, God." The lid creaked open, revealing Ava, pale, still, her yellow sundress pristine. Rex leapt, nosing her face, licking her hand, his whines softening to a whimper. "She's gone," Tom choked, but Dr. Carter shoved past, her fingers on Ava's neck. "Wait," pulse, faint, erratic. The crowd gasped as Rex barked, tail wagging weakly, his exhaustion yielding to hope. "She's in a deep coma, vitals too low for machines," Dr. Carter said, voice rising. Rex knew, he sensed her. Sheriff Lawson radioed, "Ambulance, stat." Sirens wailed as EMTs burst through. Stunned, a funeral turned rescue. Ava's hand twitched, brushing Rex's muzzle, and he whimpered, pressing closer, his mission complete. At Maplewood General, Dr. James Holt, 55. Balding, a neurologist, confirmed it, trauma-induced catatonia, her vitals dropped so low we missed them. Stress from losing Rex triggered it. He saved her life. Ava stirred. Her green eyes fluttering, her voice a whisper, "Rex." The hospital buzzed, nurses whispering, Rex granted stay by a humbled staff, his muddy fur a badge of honor. Maplewood reeled, their dead girl alive. Their vicious dog a hero, and a town's reckoning loomed. Ava Reynolds lay in a stark white bed at Maplewood General, her small frame dwarfed by crisp sheets, monitors beeping a fragile rhythm as Rex rested his head on her chest. His muddy fur matted but his amber eyes calm at last. The German Shepherd's 70-mile trek and desperate barks at Cedar Ridge Cemetery had turned Ava's funeral into a miracle, pulling her from a death-like state no machine had detected. Tom Reynolds stood by the window, his denim jacket slung over a chair, his mechanic's hands trembling as he stared at the Tennessee hills, his dark hair disheveled, his relief warring with exhaustion. Laura Reynolds sat beside Ava, her auburn hair pulled back, her hazel eyes glowing with fragile hope as she stroked Rex's fur, whispering, "You brought her back, boy, we owe you everything." The hospital hummed with quiet chaos, nurses exchanging odd glances, Dr. James Holt scribbling notes. "Catatonia from extreme stress," he explained, his balding head gleaming under the fluorescence. Her vitals dropped so low, grief over Rex, the creek incident, we misread death. Dogs sense chemical shifts, Rex knew she was alive. Ava's fingers brushed Rex's ear, and he whimpered. Tail thumping faintly, his wounds, bleeding paws, a gash from her flailing, bandaged by Dr. Emily Carter, who'd followed from the cemetery, her vet's coat back on, her gray eyes soft with pride. "He's a miracle," she said, voice steady. "I've seen dogs detect cancer, this is beyond that." Maplewood transformed overnight. The Herald retracted its smear, "Hero dog revives girl." And the Pierces' safe schools now group dissolved. Jim Pierce silent, Hannah confessing through tears, "I lied, she slipped, Rex saved her." Principal Sarah Mitchell issued a public apology, her ban lifted, and Sheriff Mike Lawson pushed for new pet policies. Citing Rex's journey. The town rallied, Maplewood Diner sent meals, the hardware store started a fund for medical bills, the church held a vigil-turned-celebration. Ava woke fully 3 days later. Her green eyes meeting Rex's. "I knew you'd find me," she whispered, her voice weak but alive. Tom and Laura wept, Rex licking her hand, his vigil unbroken. Dr. Holt marveled. Her recovery's tied to him, emotionally, physically. The Reynolds moved to a donated bungalow on Pine Lane, fenced yard, no stairs, volunteers furnishing it with Ava's drawings framed. Rex's bed by hers. A year later, Maplewood Elementary unveiled Rex's Haven, a therapy dog space, Ava cutting the ribbon, Rex beside her, certified as her guardian. She spoke. "Love doesn't quit, not ever," and the crowd cheered, Hannah now her friend, Maplewood healed by a dog's bark that rewrote their story. Lesson from the story. Love and loyalty can howl louder than despair and deception. Rex's relentless barks didn't just break through a casket, they shattered a town's misconceptions, proving that even in the darkest moments, a bond forged in trust can defy death itself. This story teaches us that true heroes don't always speak, they act, whether it's a dog racing 70 miles or a family refusing to let go. It's a reminder that when fear and lies try to bury the truth, instinct and devotion can dig it back up, showing us that sometimes the smallest voices, like a child's or a dog's, carry the greatest power to heal and unite. What do you think? Has a pet or a loved one ever fought for you when all hope seemed lost? Share your incredible stories in the comments, we're dying to read them. If Rex and Ava's jaw-dropping miracle got your heart pounding, smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss more epic tales like this. Tell us where you're watching from and what kind of unbreakable bond, furry or human, you want us to dive into next. Let's keep the love barking loud together.